Our first speaker presenter today is Maikaelja Solanmare with exploring Viossa Idiolect culture. So I will pass off the clicker to you. Here you are. And yep. And I will pass it off to you.
Hello. Cool.
Mhm.
Oh, we skipped something. There we go. Hold on. There we go. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about exploring Viossa Idiolect culture. I'm Maikaelja Solanmare. I'm so thankful to everyone for having me here. I'm really excited to be in Copenhagen. Just a brief introduction before I get into things. Obviously, you all know my name. Outside of this, I'm a student of applied languages at the University of Portsmouth. I speak English, Spanish, and Viossa, a little bit of Swedish. And my credentials on Viossa are that I have written a book in Viossa, the first novel in Viossa, Svikso, which is a great book, not biased. And I'm also the founder of Vimivera, which is the international poetry and literature competition for Viossa, as sort of a project to expand literacy rates within Viossa and create more engagement with literary Viossa. And for those of you who don't know what Viossa is a artificial pidgin language, and where many pidgins sort of take from 2 or 3 languages or have one large primary language and then multiple secondary languages. Viossa is quite interesting in that it has over 65. Obviously, there are some big contributors with this project in specific, the Viossa Kotobonoranya project. This measures every word that has ever been used in Viossa, or attempts to. And so Japanese is quite overrepresented at 16.6. It's actually more close to 12, we think. And then you see Finnish at 8.1. But if you consider Swedish and Norwegian to be contributing from the same lexicons, they're actually slightly larger at 8.6. And you have Russian, German, which combines with the Germanic languages, and Gothic. And you have significant Sinitic and Romance influences. And it creates this really varied language that's quite beautiful. And part of the reason that it's so varied is to do with Viossa's history. It was a successor to NEA, the No English Allowed project, which some consider to failed and some consider to have succeeded. That's completely up for debate and not my point to make. But part of the reason that people do consider it to sometimes have failed is that the people in the project, where some people were attempting to make this pidginized language, they ended up speaking in shared languages. And so in order to combat this, they tried largely to prevent speaking in common languages by specifically not permitting it, but also not permitting translation. And interestingly, and most impactful on Viossa Idiolect, not by saying that if it's understood Viossa, it's correct Viossa. And so it creates this standard of non-standardization that, as we've gotten more people coming in, primarily onto the Discord, which has introduced a lot of orthographical variety, but as we have these waves from Jan Musali's Conline Critic video on Viossa and etymology nerd Adam Alexic's video on Viossa in 2024, we went from some 500 people to some 5,000 in like 3 days. It was a crazy period to be in the Viossa community. And the influence that's had is quite significant, some people would say. And I'll get into that in a second. Obviously, what's unique about Viossa Idiolect culture, this rule of sort of, if it's understood, it's correct, creates this big culture of sort of encouraging variety. And also about this question of what does understandable mean? If it's understood it's Viossa, where does the line of understandability finish and where does it start? Some people would argue that it's created by the speaker, that it's the role of the speaker to simplify their own idiolect for the listener, whereas others would say that it's on the responsibility of the listener to learn the dialect of the person that is speaking to them. And generally there is this consensus that there is a nice middle ground between the two, where the speaker is simplifying their dialect and the listener is making attempts to push forward and learn the dialect that they're listening to. But obviously Viossa Idiolect can be very varied. These are only some examples of people who wanted to be shown here. And as you can see, there is a lot of orthographical differences. Some people use different scripts, some people use different grammar, some people use these really interesting particle features, and other people change the spelling of their words. It really goes crazy, and I love it that people get so creative. But some people would argue that in some ways Viossa behaves like an interlanguage. I first saw this on the Wikipedia article for Viossa before it got removed, that Viossa is sometimes described as an interlanguage. So I wanted to research this a little bit, maybe not formally. But I came across this paper by Shane Nichols from the University of Missouri in 2021 that describes this potential relationship between the case marking systems in Viossa speakers' native languages and their word order in Viossa. And while Shane's project was more about the morphological and syntactical differences between Viossa idiolects, this was something that they talked about a little bit, although they couldn't really prove anything. And so I looked at another paper from the University of Warwick, or I think it was an undergraduate project, so nothing too formal, where they interviewed some Viossa speakers specifically about the influence that the Etymology Nerd video had, because it created this massive boom in speakers. And so there are a lot of changes and a lot of new people from one specific cohort of this specific creator's following. And in this reply, they identify this S copula that previously didn't exist, this overusage of copula or increased usage of copula that previously they say didn't exist. And then this very like, unes instead of un, this normal, we see zero copula behavior. And then they also describe here this respondent E saying, sticking to an SVO structure, which Shane Nichols in his 2021 paper identified that Viossa tends to be SVO anyways. But I'm more focused on the Englishy speaking comment and the fact that they identify this copula usage again. Which is interesting to me because there is an existing stigma against copula in the Viossa community that leads to some really funny memes. And so I wanted to look at this because I've seen as a member of the Viossa community just anecdotally that people tend not to want to use it, which might potentially argue towards a theory that it's not behaving like an interlanguage, but obviously that's why we look at the data. And when I look at this just informally off of the Genuto data, Genuto being the International Viossa Census, you see at the lowest level of attainment on the left that the majority of the people at the lowest level of attainment are using copula. And then at the intermediate level, they decrease significantly. But then what's interesting to me is at the highest level of attainment, they then begin using it again quite frequently. And so this made me wonder, perhaps, if they identify specifically the S copula in respondent D's reply, is it not that the people at the lowest level of attainment using copula is wrong, but rather that they're using copula in the wrong scenarios, or that they're using the wrong copula in general? And so this made me wonder, in what scenarios are they using copula? When are they using it? For what purposes? And is it possible that the decrease that we see in the intermediate level is due to overcorrection? And another thing that I wanted to point out that I found quite interesting was when I was looking at the description that was quite an Englishy way of speaking, there was among the speakers of copular languages at the native level, 98% of them were English, whereas there are no respondents who spoke a copular language natively that used copula in their Viossa, although there were some non-copular natives who used copula in their Viossa. But I wanted to sort of check this because Genuto had quite a limited amount of people responding. And so I asked again, and there was some flaw in my methodology in that I asked sometimes, often or never, and sometimes it's quite a vague question. I got people asking what counts as sometimes. Is that if I use it ever? Is that if I use it sometimes in a month, sometimes in a year? But we see some slight trend that the Melangen use copula slightly more on the left to Viosagen on the right who prefer to use it never, but it's pretty small, I would argue. And so I thought I'd go just straight to the corpus data, that I'd get the log consent from people in the Viossa Discord server, and that I'd look at them and sort of check the usage of this S copula over time. And we see here like some pretty small peaks and troughs, and I thought maybe that could just be peaks in activity. But then over here we see this very, very large peak, 2,149 in a day at one point, average over a week, which is absolutely ridiculous to look at. But I thought, okay, well, we had so many people come in, some 5,000. I thought to compare it against ka, which in multiple Viossa corpuses is listed as the most common word. And so I checked that, and while we see that there are some peaks and troughs that sort of align with this, And again, we can see this massive peak and then this very sharp trough. That while there are more pronounced peaks and troughs where we see in the copula measurement that sometimes it just peaks into nothingness, into zero uses, it's entirely possible that this is measuring activity of some copula using minority in Viossa. And so I thought to just check the usage relative to the join date if we wanted to talk about relative to attainment level. And we see here that it's up to 170 times average in the first day, and then significantly down. But there are peaks and troughs later on, well beyond the point of significant attainment, where most people are obtaining the intermediate title at around 100, 200 days, and the majority of people have already reached the most developed stage of Viossa learning at around 400, 500. And so there are these minorities that are using copula clearly, but within these first 100 days, you can see here that it's a pretty significant decline. And I actually looked at the averages, and within the first 100 days of speaking Viossa, a person is 7 times more likely to use a copula than in the next 100 after, which I found pretty interesting. And one particular reason this might be, where Windish's principle states that people tend to contribute features from their L2 into their L1, but not vice versa, this is sort of the exact opposite of what we'd expect from interlanguage behavior. And so one particular reason I thought might be explaining this is the morphological congruency hypothesis, which states that, some of you may know, the speakers of new languages, speakers of other languages, will identify faster features that are present in their native languages or their already acquired languages in new languages, and will become more comfortable using them than other features that are not present in languages that they don't already know. And so I thought perhaps this is true. I thought another potential reason was that when I said earlier that perhaps they're using maybe not copula in general, but using the wrong copula. And so I checked. This graph is pretty dark compared to the other ones. So it might be a little hard to read, but yeah, you can see with the ya copula, the ya yes copula, that it's significantly more popular among high-level speakers, where well beyond the 300, 400 day period, they're using this copula in their everyday speech more and more. But there is this gradual decline over time, but still well into the competent level, they're using this copula, which I find interesting. One potential reason for this might be that it's just more acceptable, that S is seen as more local, as a more local source of foreignness, where a lot of the people in Genuto who were responding saying that they had copula were American English speakers, not necessarily English or British American or Scottish or whatever. And so in America, the most common second language is Spanish, and so that might be one potential reason where they're having more contact with this language, and that's sort of the most close foreign language, the most close foreign copula. And so in this no English allowed, they are sort of at the low levels thinking, okay, well, this is non-English, this is what's familiar to me, and then they're using it, and then as they get more and more developed, they're using it less and less. But then in actuality, there is this accepted more further away from what is considered normally foreign, more local, into this thing that is more established Viossa. It could just be the period in which it was coined. It could be that this is a more local thing. Obviously, we see before that the S copula was present from well into 2020, but that this has sort of stayed stable among multiple attainment rates. And so, yeah, that was my overall findings from this. And I think the conclusion that I drew from this personally was that while Viossa does allow this very high level of variation, you can definitely see these trends towards zero copula normalcy, established trends of zero copula usage. While there are these minorities that do use copula in their everyday Viossa, that these trends are represented in speech patterns across multiple years, and that while it may behave as an interlanguage with low levels of proficiency, these established trends existing and being conformed to so stringently, even if the minorities exist that are using it, that it perhaps sort of negates this hypothesis. but I think I'm running short on time. Um, and so I really couldn't fit in the rest of the things I wanted to talk about. This is obviously one feature among many in Viossa. It's a whole language, obviously, with this amazing variation. And so there's a lot more that I wanted to talk about, but yeah, I think now we just move on to questions.
Yeah.
Hello, that was a really interesting talk, and I liked it a lot. So I have two minor questions to ask. Well, first of all, well, as you stated, there were two sort of big external promotional events for Viossa, but only from the data we only saw one of them had a significant impact on the idiolectal variation in Viossa. Do you perhaps have any ideas on why the online critic video perhaps didn't have the same level of impact as the etymology nerd video, or I mean, is it like audience, or is it some the sheer volume of people joining, or perhaps some other reason? And the second one is like, to what extent do you think like the current the current explosion of copula was actually people co-opting the already extant copula S, or rather them creating ex nihilo S, but just that just so happened to look like the pre-existing copula? Especially because I'm curious, like, is there like a degree of variation in how people spell the copula? Like, are some people perhaps more English brain and spelled it IS instead, or maybe they spell it French or something? So yes, thank you.
Thank you for the question. That's really interesting on both parts. So to answer your question about why the etymology nerd boom might have been less or more impactful than the conlang critic boom, I think one particular reason is talked about a lot within the Viossa community specifically is that during the etymology nerd boom, the server actually had to be shut down because it was deemed by the Yawal, the community elders, that there weren't enough teachers to teach all of the people coming in. And so people were almost re-pigeonizing Viossa, sort of creating this new thing. And so the existing community wanted to protect what they already had. And so they actually ended up shutting off the community for about a week because there just weren't enough teachers to teach all these new people. And so I think to this extent, there's a lot of invention happening, a lot of new words, new phrases, new strategies being created. And some people would say that's bad for Viossa, some people would say that it's good. To answer your second question, I think that with regards to variation of the S copula, I'd say it's not so big. But with regards to the ya copula, you see a lot of variation. You see IE, YE, yes, yes, with the J or with the Y. You see different diacritics used. With the S copula, it tends to be people using the base English Latin script. So yeah, I hope that makes things more clear. No worries. Anything else, or do I have time, or?
Thanks for the talk. You mentioned that people have very different orthographies when they write Viossa. How do you deal with that when you're publishing writing?
So in the process of writing Suikso, I initially, for the current version that I have published, I've written it exclusively in the Latin script because that's what I'm familiar with. That's my way of speaking. Something that I really wanted to explore in Suikso, and a core theme in Suikso, is the dialect variation in Viossa, this struggle between what is the responsibility of the speaker and the listener, where the main character, Sasha, is an immigrant from Russia, moving to this island of, this ex-colonial island of immigrants, and where they speak Viossa conveniently, and struggling with the fact that no one really understands her very Slavic dialect, that it's very, it uses a lot of unconventional grammatical strategies that are seen as rare or seen as more difficult to deal with in the Viossa community, where some people do feel bullied into changing the way they speak. And there's sort of this discourse about you shouldn't be doing that. A common thing that you hear, a common analogy, is that you wouldn't ask someone to take off their clothes because you don't like them. And in the same way, you wouldn't tell someone to change the way they speak because it gets really personal to them. It often represents their philosophy about Viossa in general, where they sometimes use more compound words because they think that's what's simpler, that's just more understandable. Sometimes use more root words because they want to further their Viossa to be more specific and precise with it. Some people use specific grammatical strategies to challenge the way that they think about the language and think about language in general, and to make themselves more aware of what language is to them. And so in Suikso, I feel slightly like I didn't represent the true variation of Viossa, in that I wrote only in one script. I'm planning on publishing an unannotated edition because I wanted Suikso to be a learning resource as much as a novel. And so for the unannotated edition, I'm looking to add this variation in scripts, to add more variation in the dialects that people use. Because I really want to represent the creativity of the community in the book. I wanted it to be a love letter. And while I've represented that, I think, in the experience, I want to represent it also in the orthography of the book.
Hello, thank you so much for the interesting talk. I wanted to ask essentially how this attitude around copylist first arose within the Viossa speaking community. How is it that if so many people approached Viossa coming from copylaic native languages, how Viossa came to, in general, be zero copula before these waves of new joiners? Thank you.
Sorry, why it did develop or why it didn't?
Why did it?
It's possibly explained by morphological congruency theory, as I explained before, that people are using this familiar strategy, and that due to the lack of correction and this feeling of if it's understood it's correct, that people are using this familiar strategy and then not correcting it, not to say that it's incorrect, but that if people feel it's incorrect from the interviews, that they're not correcting it, or that it's just what's comfortable, it's just what's natural, and obviously what's natural is what's correct Viossa. So that's one particular reason it may be used among, or used before the etymology nerd boom.
Okay, thank you so much. We're running out of time for questions. Thank you so much, Maikaelja, for your presentation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.